Welcome to B2B Sales Trends, the podcast dedicated to sales leaders in the B2B space, where we share conversations about innovative and successful sales transformations to keep you up to date on the latest trends. This podcast is brought to you by Global Performance Group.
Welcome yet to another fabulous episode of the B2B Sales Trends podcast, my dear people. The show that brings you hacks, tips, tricks, thought leadership around the world of B2B selling. My name is Harry Kendlbacher, and today I have with me JP Flores. JP is the Senior Sales Director at CrowdStrike. Welcome to the B2B Sales Trends podcast, JP.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
To kick this off, give us a bit of an introduction of your good self, your role, your experience, JP. That will be fabulous.
Absolutely. So today I am, as you mentioned, a sales director at CrowdStrike. I lead one of our go-to-market teams around our next-gen SIM product line and have been in the enterprise sales game, if you will, for the better part of 25 years. So I've been doing this for a minute, primarily in the software and technology selling space, selling to large enterprises, medium-sized businesses around the world for quite some time. Done direct sales as an individual contributor, been in a few different sales leadership roles. I've supported the channel and been more focused on alliances and partnerships. Early in my career, I was an inside seller. So, as we would say those days, smiling and dialing, and just hammering out cold calls, trying to make something happen. So, have done quite a bit in my career. Have learned a little bit along the way, but as you know, the space is constantly changing. There's always more to learn, and I think that's what keeps me at it. Keeps me excited to get up every morning.
Love that. Appreciate the introduction, JP. The episode is really about how do we win more complex deals? How do we need to adapt to this current state of enterprise sales? And what's the future of it? We had a good chat pre podcast recording the other day, and we were talking a lot about how the modern B2B sales landscape has changed and how we need to adapt. And we all know that buying decisions aren't made anymore in isolation, right? Instead of selling to one decision maker, sales teams now have to navigate entire committees, groups of people that have different priorities, concerns, and so forth. How do you approach this challenge, and what strategies have worked best for building that consensus across these multiple stakeholders?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think to your point, right, the days of maybe the cliched getting a deal done on a golf course or, those days are long behind us.
Right.
We are in a position now where as sellers, we are selling to a committee. We are selling to try to build consensus within an organization,
Right.
And in order to do that, we have to sell as a committee, if you will, right? And we have to sell and think about how do we build a multi-threaded relationship with a customer to help them ultimately arrive at an outcome that's going to get to the business result that they want. And so, there's a bunch of different sort of things to unpack there. But I think the biggest theme that I've seen work in my career and the folks that have been the most successful have been extremely good at marshaling the right resources within their own organizations to align with the resources on the customer side of the table and sort of figure out how do you map those relationships to build the right types of relationships. So a couple examples of that might be, having an executive touch point within your own organization. Maybe it's the CEO, the CTO, senior VP of sales with the C-level at the customer. Then you have technical champions that you're building with your own technical resources. You're having your middle level account managers, your first line sales leaders, building relationships with the director VP level within the account. So it really is understanding how do you build those multiple layers of alignment, and also knowing when to bring in ancillary groups like that aren't necessarily directly related in selling, but we're all salespeople at the end of the day, no matter where we are in the organization. And so it's folks like product managers, engineering resources, bringing those into the conversation at the right time to build a level of trust with the customer that ultimately helps them make a decision that says, this is the customer or the company that I want to partner with, that I want to, build trust with and count on to help deliver the outcome that I need.
Right. And this idea of we have to sell an approach and opportunity as a team is really important. And how do we leverage these internal resources? And as you quite rightly said, really good, successful salespeople, they just aren't operating by themselves or solo anymore. They're working as part of a team, and that might mean to bring in different executives, technical sellers, customer success people at the right moment and the right time. How do you think these sales teams can do a better job of sort of mirroring the complexity of the buying process with a sort of a more, coordinated selling approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at the end of the day, it's really about outcome, right? What is understanding intimately what's the business outcome the customer is looking for? It's not about the speeds and feeds, if you will, the bells and whistles of your product or of what your company can deliver. It's how do you deliver the right outcome for the customer? So it's sort of this concept of beginning with the end in mind, and then reverse engineering how you get there on behalf of the customer.
Right. And that's really challenging in our world. Obviously, in our business, everything is about outcomes and what we can provide to customers, that customer-centric sort of mindset around it. And yes, your product may be delivering outcomes, and that's great. But how do you shift the conversation to outcomes? And also, how do you get your salespeople, that selling team, to communicate that? And it's really a challenging environment to get people out of their comfort zone to really have that conversation. So from your experience, what are sort of the best ways to lead an outcome-driven conversation and have people avoid getting stuck in that transactional conversation or sale?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I always focus on, and even when I'm in recruiting and hiring salespeople, is understanding like their level of curiosity about building relationships with their customers. Do they genuinely have this innate desire to learn more about what a customer is trying to accomplish? Are they curious people? And I think when you are a curious individual and you're really trying to understand, hey, Mr. Customer, tell me a little bit about what you're focused on right now. What are the things that are, you know, driving your focus at the moment with regard to, your current role? Is it, hey, I'm very focused on, taking cost out of the business. I'm really focused on creating more operational efficiency. I'm really focused on reducing, complexity. I'm really focused on growing my team. So having a very open conversation around what's the customer really focused on delivering to their business, right? And then obviously doing the research, right? I think you have to take some time. The resources are all out there. If it's a publicly traded company, of course, you have annual reports and quarterly reports that you can go into. But even if it's not a publicly traded organization, there's plenty of resources available to go learn about the business. Hey, I understand maybe you're selling to a retailer. How are you? What's the current economic environment doing to your business? How does that impact some of the decisions that you're making? To make this, we're recording this in March of 2025. what is the current tariff environment in the US doing to your business? Asking some very high level questions around the current economic environment. What is that doing to their business? And I think when you do that, A, you're learning about what's important to them. But B, I think you're also establishing credibility with the customer to say, hey, this vendor, this potential partner cares about my business. And that builds trust. And so doing that at the outset and finding that champion within the account that will be willing to share information like that type of information, I think goes a long way towards uncovering what those outcomes might be. And then it's really on the part of the seller to take that information and then figure out, how do I take what I can deliver as a company and map that back to the outcome the customer is focused on.
Right, right. We always talk about this idea of, yes, you have to have a level of curiosity, and that's really important. And you also shouldn't turn up and just ask 20 questions here, right? You should be providing value throughout your questioning cycle. And so don't turn up and ask them the same old boring questions that everybody else is asking, but have a need that you want to generate in the mind of the buyer or the prospect. Have that in mind first, so you can generate these previously unconsidered needs that the customer didn't know they have, or underappreciated needs that they haven't appreciated that can have an impact in their business, and then formulate that thought-provoking questioning to get them to that. And that provides value to the client and the trust that you have mentioned and the credibility and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important to take that piece, that curiosity portion, to the next level. What you shared.
Yeah. One trick that someone turned me on to years ago was,
Right.
when you're talking to an executive, maybe you have a meeting with a CISO or a CIO,
Right.
do a Google search and find out if they've spoken at a conference.
Right.
And find a way to watch that talk. And then when you have that conversation, say, hey, I watched the talk that you gave at XYZ conference, and you talked a little bit about, whatever the topic might be. Just that icebreaker immediately opens the conversation up, because now the customer's like, wow, this person took the time to get to know me a little bit, did their research, and is coming informed and curious. And that is a huge differentiator between the generic 20 questions that everyone else is asking.
Immediately builds credibility and relationship, right? It shows that you've done your research and that you know about, and you've taken the time to be interested, right? Too. There's one thing in the sales process that is a real big issue nowadays. It's what we hear from our clients all the time is, how do we increase win rates? And of course, it's not the sole answer to it, but one element of how to increase win rate is this idea of, how do you create urgency throughout your conversation? And a lot of the deals, fall apart because of people not doing that right.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those ways, or what are some of those effective ways, should I rather say, to help buyers move past that hesitation point and recognize that cost of inaction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a huge fan of using reverse timelining as a sort of methodology or framework for thinking about, driving a time cycle, or building a time frame that the customer has to make a decision. So, understanding, okay, hey, you're maybe the outcome that you've determined is, I'm putting my CrowdStrike hat on, like, we want to implement a new SIM technology. That needs to be in production by the end of the year. Okay. And then how do you reverse timeline that back to, okay, well, in order to do that, you have to have a certain amount of time to do the migration. You have to stand up infrastructure. You have to migrate use cases. You have to do all these things. And then the close date of the deal is just a milestone along this much larger project plan. And so if you start with that, hey, I want to be live by January 1st of 2026, the close date of your deal needs to be in maybe June of 2025. And so it's not focusing on the close date, even though that's the date most people focus on, and most salespeople focus on, because that's the day they book a deal and they get paid, basically. It's really about when are we going to deliver the outcome the customer wants, and then backtrack into a timeline that creates emergency. So if you establish that outcome date early on in the process,
Right.
and document it, maybe in an email, spreadsheet, whatever, and then, hey, Mr. Customer, you can use that to hold the customer accountable, saying, hey, when we spoke, you told me you needed to be in production January 1st. Now you're saying you can't make a decision until October. What's changed? And then it creates an opportunity to unpack, okay, now there's some objections. Now there's some issues maybe I didn't know about,
Right.
that I need to delve into, that I need to overcome to get this back on track. And sometimes those are very legitimate, and sometimes you have
Right.
to help the customer buy. You know, it's interesting. You learn as you've been doing this for a while that oftentimes the customer doesn't even, your champion doesn't necessarily know how to get something done in their own organization, or they need some help. So we have to help them build understand how to complete their own buying journey within their own organization and sell it internally.
Right. And then if you want to be up and running by the 1st of January, and now it's October, now that moves the timeline out. What is the cost of inaction here? How can you quantify that for me? By basically doing nothing. What's the stat that's out there at the moment, that your biggest competitor is not somebody else, is do nothing?
Right.
Is status quo. So can we quantify that time period to really focus on, okay, by you doing nothing, it costs you X every month in terms of whatever your KPI is, your measurement is. I find that to be an interesting touch point, and it tends to hit a nice nerve here. Great insight, JP. Buying has changed. We know that, right? It is more complex, and salespeople really have to be at an elite level these days to perform. In your experience, what are the top 3 qualities or behaviors or skills that you think you can think about that salespeople need to have to succeed in nowadays environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 3 things that I'm always focused on when I'm recruiting someone, someone maybe going through the interview process. We talked a little bit about one, right? That's curiosity, right? Are they a curious person? Are they really trying to understand what makes their customer tick and what they're trying to accomplish in their business? Are they asking a lot of questions? I know one giveaway, and whenever I'm doing an interview, for example, I always ask at some point during the interview, not necessarily the end, even though it sometimes does come at the end, is what questions do you have for me? And if they don't have a lot of questions, then that's a bad sign, right? Usually it's like, I'm hoping they're going to say, hey, tell me, how do you position yourselves in the market? What are common objections you're getting from customers? What's the growth projection? How many of your sellers are hitting quota? Like all those, they have to be curious. So if they're not curious, then that's a big red flag. The second thing is grit. And that's it's kind of a hard to define thing, I think. But you know it when you see it. And I think that really is this, whatever negative thing that happens to us as sellers, you're able to shake it off and proceed forward. This is a tough job, and it can be challenging. And at times, customers aren't always easy to sell to, or they don't always return your calls or respond to your emails, or may give you feedback you don't want to hear. And then sometimes your internal resources may not be as responsive as you want them to be. And so there's always these different objections or obstacles you have to overcome. And I think you have to have a level of positivity and a level of to kind of see through that fog and just be focused on the result that I think makes the best sellers successful. I think, and then the last thing, and this has changed for me, I think as I've kind of been doing this longer and longer, what I've found is the folks that are the most successful are the ones that are the biggest advocates for their customers. And sometimes you almost wonder, like, who are they working? Are they working for the other side, so to speak? Are they?
Right.
But now I've learned that the folks that have really been successful, wildly successful, and I'm talking, multi-million-dollar deals, 7-figure earners, they're the ones that are the strongest advocates for their customers.
Right.
And they will fight internally to get what the customer needs. And I think in those that are successful in doing that, they earn so much trust with the customer that they truly become a business partner, not just a seller or vendor or somebody who's transactionally focused. They truly become a valued advisor or trusted advisor in that type of role. So I think those, in my mind, I think those are 3 critical qualities. There are certainly others, but those are the top 3.
Right. So it's really curiosity, the grit that comes by with it, and being an advocate and a true partner. And I really like how you framed this, having the customer's outcome at heart. Having the customer's outcomes at heart and really act according to that. JP, thank you. I know our listeners very much will appreciate your insights, your thought leadership, and your experience. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend some minutes with us today on the B2B Sales Trends podcast. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Harry. It was a pleasure to be here.
2 calls to actions. My lovely people, go to B2B Sales Trends podcast. Listen to any episode that you may have missed. Forward it to people who you think this would be applicable to and you want to help them too. Or go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and like the content. Keep on listening. We have now upped it to a weekly release of an episode. So you will get a weekly episode every week. We've made that adjustment due to popular demand. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. JP, look after yourself and look after everybody in your selling process, my lovely people. Speak soon. Bye-bye.